So this is really exciting for me. My name is Greg Dorst, and the reason why it's so exciting for me is that I get to introduce myself, which means I get to tell you things that, I think about me rather than, what might have been on my little bio there, So I'm an energetic visionary at the top of my game. I am the #1 expert in substance use disorder and mental health issues for lawyers in the world. Oh, thank you. Now that actually may be true. At least it's true in my own mind. I think that's a good start, but I don't know how you quantify that. I've done a lot of work as a... Yes, absolutely. Unmatched wisdom. I get to add that to the resume, too. By the way, this is the biggest crowd in the history of the CLA. In fact, there's a line outside, and I'm just waiting for them to be brought in. No empty seats. So it's Saturday morning. We're going to have some fun. We're going to talk about some things that really matter. I got my JD in 1983 and thereafter immediately passed the bar, and immediately became a deputy district attorney. And I worked for the district attorney's office for about 5 years. I needed and wanted trial experience. I knew that I wanted to be a warrior in the trenches, and eventually I thought that what I wanted to do was win huge personal injury cases. So I wanted to start with the plaintiff's side. That's why I wanted to be a DA. So I worked at the DA's office for a while and realized that it probably wasn't my cup of tea, because I am at core a rule breaker. I have these feelings within me that push back whenever anybody tries to exert authority over me. I don't know if that kind of describes you, but that's really one of the reasons why I wanted to become a lawyer. I wanted to step into the arena, and I wanted to change things, and I wanted to be able to help clients to talk about things that they weren't able to talk about themselves, or express themselves, or prove themselves, and I wanted to do it in a way that broke new ground. So, I've always been a kind of rule breaker. Authoritarian people are not my cup of tea, and I think that the DA's office wanted me to do things by the book. I also wanted them to do them by the book, but I did not want to not have the kind of authority to dispose of cases that I thought I needed. So I moved on. I moved on to private practice, and I became a transactional attorney and a real estate litigator, and I had a side practice of criminal defense because I had to stay in the courtroom. I enjoyed that very, very much. I worked in that environment for a while and realized that it was not my cup of tea either, because they had too many rules too. And at this time, the rules were really starting to bother me because, there were certain bars I couldn't go to because we had this image to protect, There were certain places I couldn't go to. There were certain ways that I had to dress. There were certain cultural ideals that I had to live up to. And I was kind of too much for me, because I'm the kind of guy that likes to go into a bar where it's really rough and ready, play pool, and if I have too much to drink, get in a fight or spit on the floor and, do things that I should not do. So I moved on from that and opened up my own practice. And my own practice was a criminal defense practice, and I made the rules. And I quickly made bad decisions around those rules, and I'm going to get into that at some point in time in this talk. But enough about me for now. I'm here to talk about substance use disorder and mental health issues in the legal profession. And I know that there's some knowledge that you have to understand. There's some things you have to understand about us as lawyers, about the risks that we engage in, the high numbers that are associated with our profession in substance use disorder and mental health fields. I know we have to talk about that, but I really, really want to talk about some of the things that are important, and that is how it makes us feel inside, and what some of your triggers are inside, and what some of these things that you might want to look for feel like, and identify those as markers for you. And I'll start with the test that you might take if you walked into a doctor's office And the doctor's not an addiction specialist. The doctor may not know much about substance use disorder. He might be a primary care physician. And he notices that your liver enzymes are elevated. And he might take a look at you and size you up to see whether or not your eyes are red and watery. Maybe you have some broken blood vessels. Maybe you have some weight issues, either not enough or too much. Might take a look at your physical appearance and then ask you a couple of questions. And the way he or she would start is to say, have you ever felt like you need to cut down on your drinking? You need to answer the question. And that's a tough question to answer, really, because, most of us have had a night where, we have had too much to drink, and we can admit that, but we wouldn't say to ourselves, I'm an alcoholic. My God, I had too much to drink this one night, the first time in my life. I must be an alcoholic. Most of us would not do that. But the phrase cut down, I think, is intended for you to take a look at your drinking patterns over a period of time. And so you might be able to answer yes, it has caused me some problems, and I think maybe I should cut down a little bit, and I've tried. In fact, I quit for a week, or I quit for 30 days. You might not answer it that way to the doctor, but probably it's a close call. And when it's a close call and you're a lawyer, you take a look at the potential implications of the question. And you say, gosh, I make my living on my reputation. I don't want anybody to think that I have a problem. So I'm going to say, because it's a close call, no. No. And then the doctor might look at you and say, okay, well, I got another question for you. Have you ever gotten angry when somebody mentioned to you that you might have had too much to drink? Has there ever been any anger around you when somebody in your family or somebody in your work arena, if it's happened, has mentioned to you that, boy, you got bombed the other night, or don't you think you might be drinking a little too much? It might be the person that you go out for drinks with after work, or it might be the person that you have dinner with once in a while. And this person just casually mentions to you because they're just a little bit concerned about you that maybe you're drinking a little bit too much. Now, you may have mentioned that to other people. You may have looked at a family member or a spouse or a brother or a sister or a really good friend and say, it looks like you're drinking a little more than you usually have. Is there anything going on in your life? And they may have responded in anger. It may have even cost you a friendship if you've gone that far. So there's a possibility that a person may look at that question and go, oh, wow. That's a tough one. I don't usually get angry. But maybe. Can I hold that off for just a minute, Doc? Can we go on to the next question? Because I want to think about that one. So the doctor asks the next question. And the next question will be this one. Have you ever felt guilty about the amount that you're drinking or what you did when you drank? Have you ever felt guilty about that? And you start to think about it and you go, oh my gosh, yeah. Well, that has to do probably with my upbringing, not as much to do with how much I drink. It was instilled in me early on that I shouldn't be doing this kind of thing. My parents were very strict about this, or my religious order says I shouldn't even be doing it at all. But I'm not going to let that influence my decision making on this one. So I don't know. Let's see now. I guess I've felt guilty. I'm going to answer that one yes. I'm going to go ahead and answer that one yes because I want this doctor to know that I actually have a conscience. So I'm going to go ahead and answer that yes. Now, this is a lawyerly analysis, by the way. Because answering yes does not mean I'm a bad person, but it may in fact mean that I take a look at the things that I do very seriously and I have high standards. So the doctor will ask you another question then. The doctor will say to you, okay, here's this final question for you. Have you ever had a drink to steady your nerves? Or, say before noon, a little early in the day? Have you ever had an early drink? Maybe to feel a little better because you kind of overdid it the night before? Or just because you were sitting around with a bunch of people that were having a drink themselves, or watching football, or at the beach, and it started to get a little bit hot, but it was only 8:30 in the morning? Have you ever had that early drink for any reason whatsoever? And of course, we know what that means. Somebody has a drink early in the morning, and that says something about who you are. It says something about what kind of a problem you have because, who drinks before noon, right? Is it noon yet? Is it noon yet? The ice chest is within reach. It's got to be noon. So you might answer that no. You probably would. You probably would because you don't want anybody to think that you're a morning drinker or you have to drink to steady your nerves. That would say immediately that you're an alcoholic. So you might answer no, even though you might have once in a while done that. This is a really subjective test. And when you're finished taking it, the doctor might say, well, you passed. You don't seem to have a problem at all because you have to answer 2 definitely yes in order for this doctor to move you on to another test. So you might say, well, it's sort of a close call. I don't know. Maybe I do have a little bit of a problem. And then the doctor might say to you, there is a diagnostic and statistical manual, and volumes 4 and 5 actually have a definition for alcoholism in it. And I personally like the definition. I think it's wonderful because it not only applies to alcoholism, but it applies to drug addiction, use of prescription drugs, it applies to gambling, it applies to any behavior that you can overdo. But let's just say this is about alcohol for now, and then we can add in all those other things later if you want. So this definition goes like this in pertinent part. If you continue to drink despite adverse consequences in your life around drinking, then you might have a problem with drinking. If you continue to drink despite adverse consequences in your life around drinking, you might have a problem with drinking. I love that definition because you can switch out the alcohol for drugs. You can say, if you continue to use drugs despite adverse consequences in your life around drugs, then you might have a problem with drugs. If you continue to gamble despite adverse consequences around gambling, you might have a problem with gambling. You add in the behavior, whatever behavior might be troubling you. If you continue to eat sugar and white flour despite adverse consequences around that, you might have a problem with the food intake. If you continue to use internet porn despite adverse consequences around the use of internet porn, you might have a problem with internet porn. Or your electronic devices, for crying out loud. I've seen videos where people have actually walked into fountains, fallen over the edge, and because they're on their telephone, they're texting or they're watching a video or they're doing something, they're not paying attention. And people walk into traffic all the time. That seems like an adverse consequence to me, but I doubt they're going to stop. Because it doesn't have anything to do with whether or not I'm going to end up in jail, and it probably won't kill me like diabetes. So that's a great definition. But we as lawyers are able to parse out definitions really, really well. We're good at that. That's probably why we exist, right? We take a look at laws, we take a look at contracts, we take a look at documents, and we try and figure out the real meaning, or sometimes stretch the boundaries of what it is that's possible within that contractual situation. That's what we do. We're wordsmiths. We look at these things. So I've had lawyers that I've worked with say to me, well, you know what? This phrase, adverse consequence, I think I can work with that. So I'm having, and by the way, that usually, if they're working with it, usually means a little bit of rationalization, maybe too much, and some minimization, maybe too much. And so I'm sitting in front of a lawyer who's had 4 DUIs. And we're talking about the consequences for these 4 DUIs. Happened to be a he. And I have to have this conversation with him about whether or not the drinking is causing some problems in his life. As an objective individual, and if you guys are objective in this situation now, you would look at this and go, oh my God, is there even a question? 4 DUIs? With all the consequences, you're looking at prison, you're looking at losing your license, you can't drive for years. Talk about adverse consequences, But I got to have this conversation about whether or not he believes there are adverse consequences. And the conversation went like this. Well, the cops are after me, particularly after my first one, Seems like every time I get in a car, the cops are behind me. This is really a driving issue. Whoa, that's great. Now, that's a good way to look at it, right? What a perspective. It's really a driving issue. I can't get from point A to point B without getting arrested. It must be a driving issue. Why would somebody lose objectivity like that around their own life? I mean, why? How could they find themselves in that position? So here we are. We're taking a look at all of these signs and symptoms. We're taking tests from doctors. We are looking at definitions for alcoholism or any other kind of behavior. And we might be saying to ourselves, yeah, that may be a close call. You know, maybe it's not too smart for me to continue doing what I'm doing. My health is at risk. My family doesn't like it. It's hurting me at work. And gosh, those hangovers are just awful. But I don't know. So if you were handling a case and you had that question in your mind, gosh, I don't know if there's enough evidence. I mean, you'd bring on an expert, wouldn't you? You know, I'm going to be presenting this thing to a jury. I need an expert. I need to put somebody on that stand and talk about what it is that your profession believes to be the truth about the circumstances presented. I mean, you wouldn't leave it to chance. You wouldn't say, well, it's a close call, doggone it. I think I won't do that. It's a close call. I think I'll not pay attention to the evidence today. I think I'll try and talk my way out of this case. I think that I can rationalize this and minimize this and not affect my client. Would you say that? No, you wouldn't say that. But lawyers do it all the time when it comes to taking a look at themselves, especially in the area of alcohol, drugs, or other behavior. Now, how is that possible? Why would this guy who's got 4 DUIs say to me, no, it's not an alcohol issue? Why would a person who probably could have answered that test that the doctor gave him or her answer the way he or she answered when the truth was probably 3 yeses? Wow. You know, those are interesting ideas, aren't they? Those are interesting questions. Well, there are a lot of scientific answers to those nowadays. You know, the first thing is, and I'm going to self-disclose here to you guys for a moment. You know, I was that lawyer that was out there working hard and playing hard. And I could have answered yes to all of those questions that the doctor would have asked me. I could have. And I could have looked at, if I'd looked at the definition of alcoholism, I could have looked at it and said, yeah, there are some serious adverse consequences, including arrests in my life around the use of alcohol, or people telling me at work that I can't do this anymore, or a spouse that says, if you come home late or not at all one more time, you're gone. You know, that's probably an adverse consequence. Sounds like an adverse consequence to me, but listen, I could rationalize that, and I did, and I said, doggone it, if that's the way this ridiculous relationship has to end, then I guess it must. You know, I didn't like that anyway. What a great rationalization. What a great minimization. You know, I was that person. I was that person. I did not want you to think there was anything wrong with me. I did not want you to think that my judgment was in any way impaired or altered. And you know, the first thing about that was that my reputation is how I made my money. So I really wasn't going to let you know the truth about me, and I was going to bury that. And in order to go to an expert, sometimes I had to, you know, at least take a look at what the truth of my own condition is. But the more important issue was this. Alcohol had become like more than just a hobby. I mean, it had become more than just a habit. It had become everything that I thought about. I mean, while I was drinking, I was thinking about my next drink. And oftentimes that meant that once I started, I couldn't stop. But when I wasn't drinking, I was thinking about drinking. You know? And it might have even sounded like in my own head, gosh, this hangover is awful. I'm never going to drink again. I mean, I'm still thinking about drinking. I'm never going to drink again. I would promise myself that. I would promise other people that. I'm never going to drink again. A couple days later, I'm feeling pretty good, thinking, man, I was kind of hard on myself when I said that. You know? Not only that, I would kind of figure out how to get people to say, you need a drink. You know, I would be the worst and ugliest person to be around because I was coming off of that alcohol, the jitters, the feelings that I had because I couldn't numb myself anymore, and I was intentionally being an ass. Because I wanted somebody to say, oh, what you need to do is you just need to have a drink again. We can't stand this. You got to start drinking again. And, I'd jump on that one. So alcohol had become my friend. It was the way that I would deal with the stress that I had created in my own life. And when I say it's the stress that I had created in my own life, I recognize today that I had done that because the stress was created by my own perception of what was going on. The stress was created by my interpretation of my own life, of the life around me, of what you were doing to me. I mean, I was a victim. I had a victim mentality. If you had these things going on in your life, you'd drink too, If your life was as hard as mine, you would drink too. So I rationalized it and minimized it. Alcohol was my friend. It brought me to that place. And I'm not alone. Happy hours are there just for that purpose. The weekends are there just for that purpose. People sit around and taste wines and drink wines. And I did that myself, but doggone it. That was a long way to go to try to convince somebody that I was interested in the taste of something rather than the effect. You know what I mean? Oh, yes, it's got a nutty, fragrant bouquet. Really, just let me down it, for crying out loud. And then if you leave yours, there's something wrong with you, and I'll come back and get it, that's for sure. So it had become my friend. And it may be that it was a great stress reliever too, although because of the amount that I was consuming, it created a lot of stress in my life. I was doing one of these to a bunch of bankruptcy lawyers the other day. And we were talking about stress, and they were complaining about how much stress there was in what it is that they were doing. And there's a lot of stress. I mean, you guys have a lot of stress in your life, don't you? I mean, practicing law is hard. There's a lot of stress. There are a lot of things that have to be done. There's a lot of pressure on you. I mean, my gosh, the stress of having to win. Your client expects you to win. There's a battle going on. There's going to be a winner and a loser. Your client expects you to win. And you feel like you have to. I mean, doggone it, they paid you money. That's a lot of pressure. There aren't many professions that have that battle going on, where there's going to be a winner and a loser. There's going to be two people meeting in the pit or in Thunderdome, and only one will leave. But we have that pressure. We walk into a courthouse and that pressure begins. Oh my goodness, it begins. We sit down in an assignment calendar and you look around the room and you wonder who your opposing counsel is going to be, and you see all these really nicely dressed people and they look so smart, and you think to yourself, my God, I hope I don't get that one paired. I hope I'm not paired up with that lawyer, or you, or you, or you, or you, or you. Could be anybody. You're better dressed than me. Probably went to a better school. You understand this a little better, and you have better facts. Oh my gosh, stress. We got a lot of stress. So these bankruptcy attorneys were explaining all the stress to me, and I'm kind of a stress expert. I know a lot about how to relieve stress, and I know that you have to break it down into little bites. You got to figure out what it is that's causing the stress, and then we can work on that, rather than just having this overall idea in your mind that life is stressful. You can't do anything with that. You got to figure out what's stressing you out, like your finances. Are you getting enough money in the door? Is it that you don't get enough of this, or you get too much of that, or this person's talking to you about this, or this person's not talking to you about that? I mean, you got to break it down into bite-sized chunks so that you can build a plan to work on each one of those items of stress. I know that. And a lot of these bankruptcy attorneys did not know that. So I asked, how do you deal with it? And I'm always hoping somebody will say, well, I take it and break it up into bite-sized chunks so I can work on each one individually. Nobody's going to do that. No hands come up. None. So yoga? Not likely, I mean, the crowd had as much gray hair as I do, and they didn't look even as limber as I. So I knew it probably wasn't yoga. And somebody in the back yelled, I drink. And then there was laughter everywhere. And everybody else we're looking at each other and said, I do too, so do I. So pretty much 75% of the people in the room agreed that was a strategy for stress. And they laughed about it. It was great stuff, I drink. It's true. It's a strategy for stress. But for people like us, it's dangerous. And I say people like us because studies have shown that we attorneys are likely to be type A personalities. You know, we're likely to be people that can handle the stress a little better than others, people that can handle deadlines, people that do things that others would be scared to death of. I mean, we all went to school to learn how to speak in public. You know, stand in front of people and 12 jurors maybe, stand in front of 12 jurors and try to convince them of a proposition that you don't even believe in. I mean, it's crazy stuff, right? Public speaking is hard. The general public votes it as the hardest thing we do. It says that's the greatest fear. Public speaking, you probably heard of that, you know? I mean, they do this study every year where people are asked what their greatest fear is, and public speaking wins every year. Snakes won one year, I do not know why. Snakes, people are very fearful of snakes. Public speaking, number one on the list. Death is 4 or 5 usually. So people would rather die than speak publicly, you know? I mean, it's crazy. Yet we ran to it, we ran to it. Type A personalities do that. Type A personalities run to things like that. You know, the things that we put ourselves through, people who don't have those innate abilities to get through difficult times and to move into them with a fierceness that only an attorney could do. People who can't do that, people who don't want to do that, people who find that disdainful, run from this. You know, people come to me all the time and say, I need to get out of this profession. It's killing me. I do not like doing this. I cannot believe how much stress and strain is involved in trial. I don't know why I became a trial attorney. And so we start talking about how, you know, their skill set cross-references with other jobs, you know. And when we get down to how that really works, they turn around and go, I guess I better learn to do this. Because we cross-reference really well with insurance adjusters. Talk about wanting to kill yourself. Suicide's not funny, but we can laugh about it. We just have to be aware of the symptoms. And being an insurance adjuster is one of them. So, we're type A personalities. Studies for decades have dealt with type A personalities and find them to be more at risk for addictive behavior. There was a study done in 1984 around lawyers. It said it was around lawyers, but really if you dug deep and you figured out what was really going on, it was about type A personalities. And what they did was just say, well, lawyers are probably type A personalities. Most of them are, maybe all of them. And so we will just say this is about lawyers. But it was really done about type A personalities. And type A personalities have a much higher rate of alcoholism or behavior that demands repetition, that causes stress and problems in a person's life, causes those adverse consequences in a person's life. I mean, we work hard and we play hard. We do things till the wheels fall off. If that sort of resonates, that's why. And many of us are incredibly high achievers. Many of us are incredibly high achievers because we have this tiny bit of obsessive compulsive personality disorder. It's not a bad thing to have a little bit. It's not a bad thing. I mean, it's not like, you know, if this were my phone and you came into my office and moved it over here, that I would freak out until I got the opportunity to move it back. I mean, that's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about the obsessive compulsive personality disorder that works for me, that makes me want to be on top of the heap. You know, it makes me work on my paper longer than anybody else because I want to be in the top 5%. I want to graduate at the top of my class. I'll bet you there are a lot of valedictorians in this particular setting right here, in some high school or college or law school setting. I know of at least 2. So we're high achievers. And people that are high achievers, you know, they'll do things until they get it right. They'll stay out on that athletic field until they're the best. They will rewrite that paper until they get the highest grade. I mean, those are also people that will do things until the wheels fall off. And studies have shown time and time and time again that people who have a little bit of that will be high achievers and more likely to be addicted to something. Interesting, huh? Wow. So all of that stuff, you know, has led us to a point where We have done real studies recently on law students and lawyers, and they're so interesting. These studies are so interesting because they just nail down what it is that I already knew. Because, I don't know you individually, but I know what you're like. I know what drew you here. I know what drives you now. Because that's what drove me, Not that we're all exactly alike. But we have certain skill sets that we must have in order to do this job. So these studies were done. First one, in 2014, it was done around law students. And there were 3,500 law students in 15 different law schools. And they were all assessed to determine whether or not they had problematic drinking or drug use, or both, and depression, And the numbers were pretty doggone high. I wasn't surprised by the numbers. I knew that the numbers were going to be high because of exactly what I told you about us. Because people who were drawn to law school to become lawyers have those same proclivities. So I knew they were going to be pretty high because we're an at-risk group. So they're about 22.5%, just a little bit under that. 22.5% of these people had problematic drinking or drug use. 22.5%, that's double what your average person in the United States of America experiences, what your average group of people experience. I mean, you just take a whole section of a particular state, and it's double of that. That's pretty high. But part of this study was really interesting because what they did was say, we're going to go one step further. We're not just going to identify these students, but if they need help, and it looks like they do, we're going to offer it to them. And we're going to offer it to them for free. I mean, what a great service, right? I mean, identify somebody who's got a problem, allow them to fix the problem before they get into the practice of law. What a great way to deal with things. So they were offered that. If you need further assessment, you don't think you know enough about yourself, or if you need treatment, we'll pay for all of that. We're going to do that for you. You don't have to spend a nickel. It's done. It's part of this study. This is what sort of surprised me. Only 3% of those people that were identified as having problematic drinking or drug use. Only 3% of those that were offered these free goodies. All they had to do was access them. All they had to say was, that's me. Yes, I'll do that. Only 3% of them accessed it. That's crazy low, isn't it? I mean, that's like me standing in front of the doctor going, oh gosh, I'm not going to say that. I'm not going to admit that. I'm not going to admit yes on that. I'm not going to say yes on that. I haven't had any adverse consequences. It's like me hiding the truth about myself to people who could help me. I mean, why would I do that? Well, they interviewed these law students after this study was over and asked them, why didn't you do this? What do you think the answers were? Just shout out an answer. Shout out an answer. What do you think the answers were? Stigma. Oh, I heard stigma over here, and you know what else I heard over here was denial. And what that means to me, the denial thing means to me is that everybody's doing it. I mean, I'm no different than anybody else. If I wanted to quit, I could. That's a denial statement. Stigma is great. That was number one. Stigma was number one. And this is the way stigma looks. Stigma looked in this study like this. The student said, well, the law school might not want me anymore. If they find out about this, they might not want me. And then they might have a duty to report me to the state bar, and there might be a moral character issue. I mean, this is what they believed, whether it's true or not. And so the stigma of that was huge, and it kept them out. I mean, the idea that they might not be able to practice without doing something to convince, an association like this that they're okay, scared them to death. So they buried it. They had the opportunity to get fixed, and they buried it. It's because we make our living on our reputation, and there isn't any way we want people who are going to access our services for money to think that we have lack of judgment or something wrong with us. So we're going to play that game. They what? They like drinking. Of course they do. Oh, you know what? That was number 3. It dealt with the culture. It's the everybody is doing it thing. I don't know if you remember your first day at law school, your orientation. I remember it. You know, there was wine over here, there was beer over here, and it was to lubricate everybody so you would get to know one another, and the professors actually had hard booze. They were actually drinking something out of a glass with ice in it, you know, and the culture was easy to spot. You know, it was really going on. This law thing had a lot to do with drinking, and thank goodness for that, because I was already pretty doggone good at that. Yeah, you know, and everybody was doing it, and you'd have a test, and you'd go over to the bar and post-mortem the test, you know, and you'd have drinks, and you'd say, I answered it this way, I answered it that way. Oh, it was a great time, you know. You could spend hours doing that. And then if you had to go to tax class, you had to get hammered before you went to tax class. Nobody could go to tax class without getting hammered. You had to be drunk to go to tax class, you know. I mean, that's just the way it is. So the culture, yeah, all right, they like it. You know why they like it? They like it because it works for them. Maybe they don't like the taste, but they like the feeling. How many of you had coffee this morning? Yay! Me too. Me too. I hate the taste of coffee. I hate it. For me to drink it, it's got to taste like coffee ice cream. But if I can't make it taste like coffee ice cream, I'll drink it anyway. You know why? Because if I don't, I'll snore through whatever it is we're doing. And I might have a headache too. I just won't feel right. You know, it helps perk me up, helps get me going in the morning. And sometimes nowadays, you know, because I'm getting into the age group where you got to have a little boost in the afternoon too, I'll just have a couple of sips in the afternoon, you know. I'm giving myself that because it works so well. Oh, we do these things because they work for us. Law students like it. They do. So do lawyers. In fact, it seems most people like it, but some of us are at greater risk for being problematic drinkers or doing something that makes us that creates problems in our lives that can be defined as adverse consequences. So that's why these law students did not access those things. And I can understand that. So here's what I know as an addiction specialist. I know that alcoholism or other problematic behavior that's habitual, that's addictive in nature, does not go away on its own. If you ignore it, it doesn't get better. It's a progressive disease. It gets worse and worse and worse and worse. It can be more problematic as time goes by, not less. And so unless there's some sort of intervention, people are going to get worse and not better. So there's no intervention for these law students. They step into the practice of law. What do you think? They're worse than they were. They're not better. And so here comes the 2016 ABA study. Now that was done by the American Bar Association and Betty Ford / Hazelden, which is they're not only recovery and treatment centers, but they're also a research center, and they're a publication, large publication center for these kinds of things. And so they operated this large study with over 23,000 lawyers. And they dealt with these issues that we knew were present. I mean, we can see these things just by virtue of the fact that we practice law and we are where other lawyers are. And they found some interesting things. They found, as they broke it down into age groups, that younger lawyers, people who have been practicing for less years, have more problems than those that have been practicing longer, have greater and more severe issues with alcoholism, drug addiction, and major depression than those that have been practicing longer. In fact, 31% of lawyers who have been practicing from 0 to 10 years had identifiable issues that needed treatment. Yeah, I do know why. I do know why. Because they are unbreakable. Because in their mind, they're invincible. Because this is the beginning of my life. And if there's anything that's wrong, I'll see it and I can fix it. Because I'm not going to be like them because I'm smarter. I am a warrior, whether you're male or female. You know, some of us get beat down and we decide we don't want to handle this battle anymore. We don't want to deal with this battle anymore, so we become smarter instead of, more combative. But it might be that if many of the lawyers who were in the 20 to 30 year range were still around, or the 10 to 20-year range were still around? Because here's what happened. The numbers were very high for the younger lawyers, but if you were in the 10 to 20-year group, the numbers started to go down. If you're in the 20 to 30-year group, they went down even further. And nobody asked why. I mean, it might be because they were disbarred or went to prison or died. Who knows? We don't know, but we know those numbers are less. I mean, so if they were still around in between the 10 to the 20, it might still be high. Might still be very high. But we lose some of them. Stress may have gone down. Well, the stress goes down when you learn how to do it better. My father, who was a blue-collar guy, I mean, he was really an interesting guy. You know, we used to sit around the dinner table, and when I was young, he would talk about people like me, who I eventually became, you know, addicted to alcohol, addicted to stimulants. He would talk about people that he would see on TV like me, and he'd say, you know, we ought to take them out and shoot them. Really? I mean, that was his solution. Take them out and shoot them, you know? I mean, and that's still the solution for a lot of people. And some organizations believe that you ought to take them out and shoot them. But that's what he said until he found out that I was an alcoholic and had issues with stimulants. And then all of a sudden, he had a different idea because he loved me, you know? And it was close to him. It became something that was near and dear to him now. And he actually started paying attention to what happens to people's lives, you know, when they overdo things and whether or not there are solutions that they can access. I mean, he really started paying attention to it. And you know, sometimes it takes that in our families to start paying attention to things. You know, I cannot tell you how many funerals I have been to for opioid use disorder deaths, overdoses, for the children of lawyers. Oh my gosh, we're talking about, you know, 16, 17, 18, 20, 25, 31-year-olds. I have been to a ton of funerals for the kids of these lawyers. I've been to a ton of funerals for the lawyers themselves. Wow. Yeah, so this study that was done by the ABA, Hazelden, ABA, 31% of the new lawyers goes down as you move along. That's a high number. That's a really, really high number. Now, that's the problem. That's the problem. The stress is involved in the profession, the way we live our lives, the problematic timing of the things that go on. We just don't have enough time for anything. You know, I mean, if I had enough time for this, if I had enough time for that, you know, I can't wait to get over the hump. You know, things are going to be different after this case. It's never different. It's never different. You know, it's time to take a look at that and say, it's not going to be different unless I make it different. You know, I really have to set some time aside for things that are healthy. So those numbers are indicative of the problem. So I'm here mainly to make you aware of that, but to bring some solutions for you. I want to bring some solutions, and there are solutions available. You know, you can see up on the slide here that, does it say that it says that I'm an addiction specialist. That's a CADC2, but there is the phrase, the other bar down there with a telephone number that might give you a hint that I am not only a confidential member of the other bar, but I am also a consultant for the other bar, which is a group of recovering lawyers, judges, and law students who help each other to stay sober one day at a time. We're a confidential organization where people who say, well, maybe I have a problem, can come and learn about whether or not they do. Or if they actually answer that question, yes, absolutely, I have a horrific problem, they can put their finger in the belt loop of somebody else and learn how to practice law sober. Where they can receive some wonderful information about this disease, this profession, about some of the collaborators that work with the other bar. You know, I've got this $1 million Rolodex, and if you're in that group of 1 year to 10 years, you may not know what a Rolodex is. But I have $1 million Rolodex, which means this is the phrase I use. I don't have a Rolodex either. But it's the phrase I use to describe all the connections that I have, all the people I know, all the professionals that I can refer people to in their own area of expertise that will help people to move through these problems and to live a richer, deeper, more wonderful life. And so I get to do some really amazing things. I get to see people at their worst, in the deepest, darkest moments of their lives, where they're having problems with families, with the profession, where they're having problems with everything in life. Because when one thing starts to go down, everything starts to go down. The way we do one thing is the way we do everything. And we learn how to do these things better. We learn how to be better in every area of our lives. And we learn by example, and we learn through the information that we receive, and we learn by creating community. Community is intensely important. And so we get together and we become accountable to one another. Totally confidential. 30 different meetings throughout the state of California can be accessed at, I guess I got to turn to this page. Hopefully it's on it. Oh, you got to hold it right. Otherbar.org. The Otherbar.org will give you all of the information about the Other Bar, including the existence of a Northern California consultant, which is my counterpart. I do Southern California, and my counterpart, David Mann, does Northern California. You guys may have seen him present at some time or another at a bar association or maybe at your law firm. David, stand up. Stand up so people can see you. Yeah. Mm-hmm. So, we work on a confidential basis with lawyers, judges, and law students who need our help. And you may not have known this because we're sort of underground. But we come out for events like this so that we can be of service and helpful to others. So that's one big tool in the toolbox. And sometimes I look at a situation and I think, there may be some extra help that you need. There may be some real help that you need that can be accessed through the legal profession itself, through the state bar processes itself. You may need the lawyer's assistance program. I mean, you have an issue that may be brought to the attention of the state bar through your conduct. You might face disciplinary problems. You might already be in the middle of a disciplinary mess, and you might need to get involved with the lawyer's assistance program, which can help you to move through these things. Long-term help. The lawyer's assistance program is offered through the State Bar of California. And it was brought to us by statute in 2001. Senator John Burton made sure that a lawyer's assistance program was developed in the state of California because his chief of staff who was a lawyer, suffered from alcoholism and stimulant abuse and was disbarred while he was his chief of staff. And he always thought that if there was some sort of program within the state bar, maybe he wouldn't have lost his job. And so he worked really, really hard to pass this law, and there's some people who work on this particular area and do a great job. The Lawyer's Assistance Program is a terrific resource. And if you were here yesterday and you watched Lita present, who works for the Lawyer's Assistance Program, Lita, will you stand up? She's involved in helping lawyers, law students, not judges. Judges like to go real secret. To work on their issues. So these are the tools that we have in the toolbox. And sometimes what we end up doing, in fact, most of the time through the Other Bar, is referring people to groups, other groups that might be helpful to them. If somebody comes to me and says, I'm not an alcoholic, but I sure gamble a lot. It has ruined my life. I can move them into that space where they get all the connections they need to work on their gambling problem, including things like Gamblers Anonymous. If you have a problem with drugs, I can hook you up with just about every possible solution-oriented group or individual known to man or woman. I mean, there are solutions out there, and why wouldn't you access them? I mean, to say, no, I'm not going to look at those things if I have a problem, or I might have a problem, is to not hire that expert that could win your case. So that's what we offer. We offer that to people. We save lives and careers, and I couldn't be happier about what it is that I do today. This whole idea of developing community, and by the way, what time is it? It's 9. Oh, I have 9 minutes. I have 9 minutes. Okay, I can do this in 9 minutes. So community is incredibly important. Do you guys remember the rat study that was done back in the 80s where they put rats in cages? They put a single rat in a cage and they had 2 levers. One was for food and water, and one was for cocaine. Remember that? And I mean, it's a very popular study for people to talk about. Well, rats will, if they get, cocaine, they'll never access water and food again. All they'll want is cocaine, and they'll die. I mean, they will. They'll kill themselves by just pressing that cocaine lever again and again and again and again, and they'll die of starvation and dehydration. They won't even press the other lever. Yeah, well, that was a study that I remember I was indoctrinated into, and it kind of just became like law until they did a new study. And this new study was called the rat community, and it had the same concept. It had levers for food and water and levers for cocaine. And they could press the cocaine levers as many times as they wanted to. All of them could, because they were in a rat community. There were 100 rats in this community where they had, opportunities to interact with each other, and they were on treadmills, and they got exercise, and they got all the things that a community of rats would normally get: the support, the companionship, those drivers that, our amygdala drives us toward, those things that we would die if we didn't have, were available to them. And do you know not one rat died in that community? Not one rat continuously pressed that cocaine lever until they died of starvation or dehydration. Not one. I mean, this thing that we thought was law, people, because people are just like rats, once they get a hold of cocaine, are not going to be interested in anything else. This is all they're going to do. Oh my goodness. Rat communities can thrive and survive with problems if they're in a community. And so we are much like that. Community is incredibly important. Having that fellowship, that ability to express yourself. I remember the time I was ordered into the program of Alcoholics Anonymous, and I had to bring a card in there. You guys, if you do any criminal law, you know what that's all about. Or you may have had an issue yourself. Who knows? I don't know. But I was ordered to go into that program, and so I did. I had to get my card signed a bunch of times, and I thought, this is a bunch of bunk. I'm going to sit in the back, and then I'm going to get my card signed, and I'm going to go do what I want to do. Then one day, somebody called on me to share. And so I just let it all loose. I'm a lawyer. I'm having problems in my office. The state bar is looking at me for this offense. I said, blah, blah, blah. The world is falling apart. It was all about law and how I was the victim and how there were problems in my life around the things that had happened to me, and it was everybody else's fault. I mean, on and on and on. And despite the fact that I was having severe problems, obviously, a line formed to the left for free legal advice. It's true. It's true. The people came up to me, I got this problem, I got this problem, I got this problem. I figured out right then and there that I couldn't let loose in a meeting like that. I shared myself right out of that meeting. I needed to sit down with a bunch of lawyers and talk about lawyer things. Today I still have people who are in, fellowships like Alcoholics Anonymous, which I love. I got recovery there too. I still have people say, well, what do you need specialty meetings for? What do you need these meetings for? Well, you need to be able to talk about things that you have to keep confidential. You need to be able to talk about what's going on in the most important part of your life. By the way, being a lawyer is the most important thing happening to you. I know that. I know that. Somebody says, who are you? You say, I'm a lawyer. That's what we do. But we identify with it so much that that's what we say. So these are the solutions available to you. It's wonderful stuff. I could go on and on about brain chemistry too and tell you how continuous drinking and use of drugs can change your brain chemistry, and that's true. It won't change back until you stop. And the problem with it changing to what it becomes is that it doesn't let you stop. Isn't that wild? That is so wild. The brain chemistry changes. Your brain stops producing the chemicals that make you feel good naturally because you're artificially introducing it into your own system. So it down-regulates, stops producing the dopamine, the serotonin, the endorphins, the 62 neurotransmitters that rush through that pleasure pathway, stops producing those things. And who can blame the brain, right? I mean, it doesn't need to do it. It's just sitting idly by there, so just down-regulate. You don't have to work so hard. Problem with that is that once you stop, you feel like you're going to die. And you know how to feel better. You know to go to the liquor store. You know to go to the connection with the white coat, maybe. A lot of people go and get drugs from their doctors. So yeah, brain chemistry is a big problem. We know a lot about the brain today, but we also know that the brain can regenerate, start producing those chemicals again. We just need to get rid of some of the things that were keeping it from doing that, including the offending substances. But we also know that we can build new neural pathways by doing things that are healthy for us. We can start building some new ways of being, some new ideas can create new neural pathways. And we know that today. We didn't used to think that we could create new brain cells, that we could really change our lives and our abilities to create our own lives through some of the thoughts we have, but we know that to be the truth now. If you have a certain idea, a thought, a desire, a passion, the brain starts to work to build neural pathways to make it happen. So it makes sense to live on the sunny side of life because your brain will start building that pathway so you really, really do. Yes? I am so glad that you said that. Here's the question. It wasn't a question, more of a statement. Her brother was an alcoholic. He started to meditate. And I don't know what was happening during that meditation process, but he was certainly working on his interiors. He was working on what's going on inside of him. And we know that it's an inside job. The change has to come from within. And then things start to change on the outside. So he used meditation. And he stopped drinking as a result of using meditation. Well, here's what I think about that. I think that there are innumerable ways. There are literally infinite numbers of ways to recover. I'm not this guy that says, you have to do that, you have to do this, there's only one way to do this, there's only one way to do that, only one way for people to recover. My experience tells me that people recover in a number of ways, but just don't fool yourself. Just don't fool yourself. And I could tell you some wild stories about that, but we don't have time, do we? See, I told you this should last until 12:30. Yes. So I'm going to stick around for a few minutes if you want to come up and talk. But I want to leave you with this. You don't have to live that way anymore if that's you. And chances are it's not. Chances are I'm speaking to the choir because last night was Friday and it's early, And you all look pretty good and nobody's falling asleep. You don't have your head down on the table. Everybody's good. But if it's you or if it's somebody you know, they don't have to live that way anymore. They don't have to compromise their health, compromise their profession, compromise their family, and live in a hell created by themselves. They do not have to live that way anymore. There is a way out. So these resources over here are really helpful. And, my telephone number and David's telephone number are on that last page. I'll turn it back to that front page. That 800 number rings directly to a phone that is answered 24 hours a day. And if you have a problem, boom, those are our business hours, 24 hours a day. We both have cars, we get in them and we drive. If there's something that's going on, we just go. Now that is so cool, isn't it? That is so cool. Oh, yeah. This is something that we do because the other bar, we don't charge you money for this. The other bar doesn't do that. Actually, we operate on the goodwill of lawyers we serve, of firms we serve, of people that have been helped by our services. I mean, we're a nonprofit corporation and a foundation, and what we do is we receive donations gladly. We save lives and careers through the thank you process, through the gratitude process. And you know what? That lets you know that it really works because people are grateful enough to give. And if you want to give too, you can go to the website and you can just press a button that allows you to give. I mean, it's a wonderful thing. Most people don't care much about lawyers except for lawyers. They don't. I mean, the lawyer jokes are wonderful, aren't they? They're usually not very funny for us, but they're like this. What's the difference between a dead snake in the road and a dead lawyer in the road? Well, there are skid marks in front of the snake. How many lawyers on a bus down on the bottom of the sea? Not enough, stuff like that. I mean, people don't typically want to help us. We want to help us, but other people don't. Can you imagine walking door to door saying, I'm here to invite you to give money to wayward lawyers? Or a commercial like like the pets, that they just break your heart, these beautiful pets, and they zoom back and they're in cages, I mean, what if it's a lawyer, you're a lawyer and the lawyer's in a cage, you could help this lawyer just give $1.22 a day. Really, I mean, it's so funny, it's so laughable, But the truth of the matter is that people don't often give to groups like us. It takes us to do that. We're the guardians of our own future. We're the guardians of our own profession. We're the ones that drive us forward in ways that are just magical. So I love what you do. I love what you do. It can be a magnificent life, and it's been my pleasure to be here with you. Thank you.